So as I was saying, if you are going to write for others, you should write about what you know, and in a manner that invites the reader to enjoy your tale with you, and not to be made to feel inferior to your intellect or education. The writer needs to write about an interesting subject that appeals to a wide audience, with characters that the reader can identify with. In writing classes, they often tell you that when you begin to write about something that is familiar to you, something you enjoy. I am sure this is a technique that all the great authors used. It's just easier to do. I'm not saying that Tolkien was a little furry-footed guy who associated with elves and fought orcs, or that Salinger slept with hookers or anything like that. Who knows? Maybe they did. That's not the point. The point is, they wrote about things that came easy to them, things they were familiar with or enjoyed, whether because the stories were based on an elaborate fantasy of the author's own construction or on his own life experience. The topics they discussed in their stories were ones that they had knowledge or experience with, so that they would be able to educate the unfamiliar reader if necessary, and allow them to experience the events of the story along with the characters from the safety and comfort of a favorite chair. This is what makes reading such stories enjoyable. Me, I prefer to write like I think, for better or worse. If you like listening to me, then you would like how I write. If not, well, then this might be a harder route than I originally thought. With regard to what I should write about, to tell you the truth, there is not much I am too confident about, or at least confident enough to write about and allow the world to scrutinize it. Of course, there is one thing I do think I know more about than anyone else. Me. I could write a book about me. But now I'm breaking my own rules. I am not fiction. Quite frankly, I'm not sure a book about me would sell too well either. Maybe I could write about a guy like me. Maybe I could write about a guy with a similar background. It would be like a near me, like near beer. You know the beer that tastes like beer, but does not have any alcohol in it? Like decaffeinated coffee. But who drinks that? Remember the author I mentioned above? Rumor has it that is what he did. The main character in his story was thought to be semi-autobiographical. In fact, he always said that if a movie was ever made of the book, he would want to play the main character. I could do that. Some fact, some fiction. I mean, how hard could that be, right? Throw in an interesting story with a plot twist or two, some cool characters, top it off with a happy ending, and voila, a triumph deluxe. Where to begin? I suppose at the beginning. Aside from my issues I had with my name, my childhood was pretty normal. Nothing crazy. Growing up in the suburbs of Philadelphia was much like you'd expect. I was the youngest child of 4. I had one brother and 2 sisters. My father was an engineer and my mother a housewife. We went to church on Sundays, parks and ball games on the weekends. During the summers, we would go to the Jersey Shore or to the campground in Bear, Delaware. Like I said, it was pretty normal. Growing up, the church was a big part of my life. This may sound strange, but my faith is a foundational piece of my very being. Since I was a very small child, my parents took me to church. Or rather, it's more accurate to say my mother took me to church. She was very active in the church. She taught Sunday school and participated in the choir. At a very early age, I was taught to fear the Lord. It is said that fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. If that is true, then I must be wise beyond my years. About 3rd grade, things took a bad turn. My father worked at the Westinghouse plant in Essington, Pennsylvania. Essington is a marshy, industrialized zone just south and west of the city of Philadelphia. He was laid off and had a great deal of trouble finding work. We lived on public assistance for a while. He eventually found work driving a school bus, only to lose that job when his supervisor discovered him sleeping on the job. Then things went from bad to worse. The police came with a warrant for his arrest. This story is not about my fractured childhood, so I will not bore you with the details of my father's criminal record. Maybe if this one sells, I'll write another story and tell you about that. In the meanwhile, I will only share with you here how this has all affected me and helped shape who I am today. I do this in an attempt to give you a little insight into my motivations and personality to help you better identify with me, or rather, my character in this story. A little trick I learned in a writing course in college. Another easy elective. Not bad, huh? Anyway, as a result of my father's incarceration and my mother's inability to provide for us on her own, my siblings and I became wards of the state. Although they did try in the beginning to keep us together, we were all eventually split up and sent to live with separate foster families all over the state. For the next 4 years, I bounced from place to place, family to family, home to home. As you can imagine, it was difficult really forming any lasting bonds or relationships with anyone, including the families during this time. I never knew when I would be moved to another home, and in one instance was given only a few days' notice that I was being relocated. I'm not crying about it, I'm just explaining what happened. In fact, I almost see it as being to my credit. It taught me to be self-reliant and resourceful. Of course, another inadvertent result is that I do have a tendency to be a little self-centered as well. I do not deny it. And yes, I am very much aware how many times I have used the word I thus far in the story. By the time the state returned us children to our mother, as my father was still in prison at the time, we had become little more than strangers living together in the same house. Every one of us looked out for ourselves and did what we needed to get by. My mother worked several odd jobs and was never home. My siblings were off trying to take back their own lives. There were no more summer vacations or family picnics in the park. Hell, we rarely even ate together. I knew they were still living in the same house because their stuff was still there. If I wanted clean clothes, I washed them. If I wanted to eat, I bought and cooked a meal. If I wanted new clothes or school supplies, I bought them. If there was anything I wanted, I worked for it, like many other kids my age did. No big deal. I worked several little jobs here and there, whatever was necessary to get by. Ultimately, the lesson that I learned was that if you want, you need to go out and get. If you sit and wait for someone to hand you something, you are likely to be waiting a long time. After high school, I went to college. Not because my parents wanted me to, or even because that's what I thought I should do. I especially didn't go to find myself or to party. I went to college as a means to an end. I went to college because, statistically speaking, college graduates on average earn more over a lifetime than non-college graduates. It was as simple as that. I entered as a liberal arts major but quickly switched to lab sciences. The liberal arts program required me to take a foreign language, and after 3 years of French 1 in high school, I knew that learning a language was not something that was going to come easy for me. I was going to have to work through college. There was no free ride to be had. If you're going into something knowing it's going to be hard and expensive, you are going to try to stack the odds in your favor. So science was the way to go for me. Off to college I went. Actually, I slept through most of it, working 2 or 3 jobs at a time, sleeping through classes, and just squeaking by with passing grades. By my junior year in college, I had transferred to another college. The local campus where I attended classes did not offer the degree that I sought. I transferred to a university that had a laboratory science program and was closer to home. Regardless of the school I attended, the goal was the same, as was the method. I worked at night, slept during class, and squeaked by. The best part of college was meeting my future wife and mother of the 2 greatest and best-looking kids in the world. Let me just say that if my father's incarceration was a turn for the worse in my life, my meeting her was a turn for the better. After college, we moved into a small suburban home, a little place that was more than adequate for our needs. We were both working at large university health centers in the city. After 2 years, I went to law school, and she to graduate school. Our son was born shortly thereafter, and 22 months later, our daughter. I need to take a moment here. Let me tell you a little something about myself here, or rather, what domestication has done to me. I was one of those guys who never wanted to have children. Honestly, I never really saw the point. All of my siblings had children early and out of wedlock. I saw children as a burden, a responsibility that rarely ever caused the parent to realize any net gain from the endeavor. When my wife and I married, we had very different ideas about children and family. As I stated above, I was content not to have any. My wife wanted 3. Her family is very close, and having children and a family of her own was something she had always wanted. To her, a family required 3 children. We compromised and had 2. Marriage is about compromise, right? Of course, the other part of the compromise was the when. I managed to talk her into holding off starting a family for a few years. I held her off as long as I could. Truth be told, I was afraid of having children. I was afraid of the responsibility. Ultimately, I was afraid of making mistakes. No one starts a family planning on failing, or planning on screwing anyone's life up. Everyone comes into it with the best intentions, but things happen. I was concerned that despite my best efforts, I would fail. When you just have yourself, you're the only one you can mess up, right? When our first child was born, all that I thought I knew about children and raising them went straight out the window. What Dr. Spock says, well, you can take it under advisement. But ultimately, you do what needs to be done. You do what needs to be done to keep the child alive, to keep it from crying, to keep yourself sane, and your marriage intact. That is the first 6 months of a new baby in a nutshell. I did not realize how much I had changed after the birth of my son, or to say it another way, how much having a son changed me. One night I was watching some nature show on television. I love these types of shows. You know, the ones in which one animal tears another to shreds while a monotone narrator clinically dissects the process of the kill? Great stuff. My 3-month-old son was sleeping peacefully in his room down the hall. My wife was working the overnight, so it was just the boy and I until dawn. Even though he was sound asleep, I had the baby monitor nearby, knowing he was going to wake up soon. I figured I had at least an hour of peace before he was due to eat again. The program was titled Drought in the Serengeti. It focused on the wildlife around a particular watering hole that happened and what happened to the animals that depended on it for their survival as it dried up into a muddy hole during the summer months.